Loss and Bereavement Programs at the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. We're going to take just a minute or two to let people sign on. So we're going to talk about the weather while people do. So we're in New York, incredibly cold.
And beautiful, sun shining.
Yeah. You're from Southern California, so this is a little rough.
I was just thinking about where you just came from, in the Bay Area.
I came from San Francisco Bay Area.
And where we used to be, in San Diego. So, but it's beautiful. 30 degrees is not so bad when it's bright and sunny.
Right. So I think we're all here. So let's get started. Welcome to Survivor Day Live. This is an event that's for people who are unable to attend one of the 275 International Survivors of Suicide Day events taking place around the world today, from Santiago, Chile, to Kathmandu, Nepal, and from Anchorage, Alaska, to Atlanta, Georgia. With me here at the national headquarters of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention in our conference room on the 29th floor of 120 Wall Street is Dr. Christine Moutier, who is our Chief Medical Officer at AFSP, and Shirley Kaminsky, who is a national board member and also chair of the Loss and Bereavement Council, which is a volunteer committee that advises AFSP on all of its loss and bereavement programs. So we're delighted you're here. Also, Shirley is a loss survivor herself. Her son David took his life in 1987 when he was 18 years old. We also have three other special guests joining us far from here. Joining us from Portland, Oregon, is Lindsay Grazel, who's the producer and editor of The Journey, which is the documentary we're going to be watching in just a little while. Lindsay, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We're really glad you could join us. And for those of you watching out in our audience, just so you know, we're using the Google Hangout platform, and the what you see is voice activated. So when I just said hello to Lindsay, and then she said hello back, somehow Google Hangout knows that we should have an image of Lindsay up on the screen. So Lindsay, if you can just say hello once again.
Hi, I'm Lindsay.
Great. So now people can see how that works. Lindsay Grazel is a seasoned filmmaker and a skilled editor who knows how to let a film find its own pace as the stories reveal themselves. Lindsay's work appears on television, in theaters, and national parks. And we'll be visiting with Lindsay a little later in the program after we've watched the film. Joining us from Berkeley, California, a senior at the University of California at Berkeley, is Blake. Blake, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
It's great to see you. Thanks. Also joining us from California is Brianna, who is a sophomore at the University of California, Davis. Brianna, welcome.
Hi, everyone. I'm honored to be here.
Brianna, you have to unmute.
I did.
There you are. You're back.
Yeah, okay. I said hi. I'm honored to be here.
Thanks, Brianna. And I just realized I forgot to introduce Blake properly. So, Blake, I'm going to read your introduction now. Blake is currently a student and athlete at the University of California, Berkeley. Shortly after he graduated from high school, his close friend Tyler took his own life. Since Tyler's death, Blake has become an outspoken advocate for suicide prevention and mental health awareness. His volunteer work has included interning with AFSP's San Francisco Bay Area chapter and serving on AFSP's Loss and Bereavement Council. Blake is a participant in The Journey, which is why he's with us today. And Brianna. Brianna is also a participant in the film. During her 4 years of high school, Brianna lost 4 classmates to suicide, including her boyfriend. In 2010, after learning about AFSP through a bus advertisement, she actively put her efforts, grief, and intentions into an AFSP community walk. In the years since, she's participated in numerous local and national Out of the Darkness walks and founded high school and college organizations dedicated to suicide prevention and awareness. So for those of us who are joining us for the first time on a Survivor Day, Shirley, I want to ask you about Survivor Day. If you can tell us, what is International Survivors of Suicide Loss Day? You organized Survivor Day events for years in the Bay Area of California.
Survivor Day, to me, is a day when survivors of suicide loss can come together for healing, Some people haven't started their healing journey after their loss. Some people are still in very deep, deep grief. And this is an opportunity where people can see other survivors who might be a little bit further along than they are, and hopefully will come away from the conference having a sense of hope and having maybe started their healing journey or learned some new things about continuing their healing journey. I started the first Survivor Day conference in the San Francisco Bay Area 10 years ago. And my need in doing that was because there was nothing available when my son died in 1987. And I became involved with AFSP in 2002. And we had our first Survivor Day and our first Out of the Darkness Lock and started our chapter in San Francisco in 2004.
I remember my first Survivor Day event was in 2008. It was 2 weeks after my sister-in-law took her life. And I remember when my sister-in-law died, thinking, I can't do this alone this time. When I was 12, there was nothing, just as there was nothing for you when David died. And I was all alone in the experience of losing my dad. And when my sister-in-law took her life, it just triggered everything that had happened before. And I thought, this time, I can't do it alone. And I knew from my work that AFSP existed. I knew about Survivor Day. I'd done some research on AFSP in the past. And so 2 weeks after my sister-in-law took her life, I went to a Survivor Day event here in New York City. And there's a direct line from that day to where I'm sitting now. I have had this job for 9 months at AFSP. I became a volunteer with the organization. I joined the Loss and Bereavement Council, which you now chair, and you became my mentor and remain my mentor. And then I became chair of the council and was also a national board member and then joined the staff 9 months ago. And that experience of going to Survivor Day was so healing because I got to meet all these people who had lost someone to suicide. And I hardly knew anyone who'd been through that experience.
And there is such a large community of us who are survivors of suicide loss. And yet so many people feel so isolated and alone. And this is an opportunity on Survivor Day for people to come together with that community of lost survivors and establish some contacts, perhaps even, and some connections so that they can have some companionship in the journey that they're on.
I think it's so much easier to talk to other people who had gone through a similar experience than to talk to a stranger I didn't know, because you never knew in talking to someone if they would react by saying, oh, I had a suicide loss as well, or what has happened with my dentist, a new dentist recently. He asked me what I did for work, and I mentioned, and he looked a little surprised above his face mask. Eyebrows went up, and I said, well, my dad took his life when I was 12. I did a book about suicide, and now I work for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And at that point, I thought the right thing to say is, oh, that's really awful. I'm sorry what happened to you. He never said another word. And that doesn't happen when you go to a Survivor Day event, or if you go to a support group for suicide loss survivors. You know that the people there know what you've been through. They can say, I understand. Mm-hmm. Christine, how does Survivor Day fit into the work of AFSP?
Well, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention was started by a group of people who had lost their loved ones to suicide, and a group of research scientists and clinicians. And that combination of science and caring, supportive, and clinical perspective, along with the real-life experience of loss, and then later a growing grassroots effort to reduce suicide rates, to raise awareness about the warning signs and what can be done to prevent suicide. All of that really has grown over the years. So now the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention is the leading private organization that funds suicide prevention research, creates programs that stem from the results of that research, so evidence-based prevention programs and support programs. So supporting loss survivors has always been at the crux of all of those activities. We know that that by supporting people who have lost a loved one to suicide, well, first of all, let me just say that the experience of suicide loss is so much more commonplace in our communities than we've realized, I think. Traditionally and historically, this has been a very more taboo issue, like you allude to, your experience with the dentist, and people just don't know what to say and how to approach the subject, and it wasn't informed by science, even not that long ago. Now we know that there are health and psychosocial and real life event types of factors that come together to create that suicide risk. So it really is a growing movement, and we do believe that by supporting people who have lost people in their family or in their life to suicide, that you create a network where people are able to speak about their experiences, heal themselves, thereby lowering their own suicide risk, but also learn to speak about it in their communities, raising awareness in sort of a ripple effect. And above all else, it's just simply the right thing to do because it's such a core part of our mission as an organization.
And for people who are watching, if you'd like more information about the work of the organization and would like to have answered any question you might have about suicide or suicide loss, our website's an easy one to find. It's afsp.org. It's our initials. Or if you go to survivorday.org and just click on AFSP wherever you see it, you'll get it to our website. Now, we're going to switch over to the film in just a few minutes, but I'm going to introduce, just so you know, we're not by ourselves in this room. We've got our whole crew here. You can't see them. It's the secret, the magic of being online. We have Shelby, who's on our staff. We have Claire Wolford, who's one of the staff people in our department, at the Loss of Grievance department. Hannah Moak, who is in charge of all things technical here at AFSP in the communications department. We also have Camille, Dr. Moutier's daughter, who's here, who will be helping us with our questions. And we have a bit of a technical glitch today about how to get to the film, because the film is coming up next. I'm going to ask Hannah to replace me for just a minute and explain to all of you how you get to the film. Before Hannah comes, though, and takes my place, we're going to go away for 30 minutes while you watch the film. So we will come back at 1:45 Eastern Time, so 30 minutes from now. And Hannah, why don't you join us and explain to everybody how they're going to get to the film on their computers?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. I just want to tell you that you can find the film link either on the Google Plus page by which you found this broadcast, or you can also find it at bit.ly/AFSP Journey. That's bit.ly/AFSP Journey. bit.ly/AFSP Journey. All right, so now we're going to go to the film, and we'll see you soon.
I just have a question before people go away. When you say they can find it on the Google Plus page, it's only for people who have Google Plus, correct?
I believe so. You'll see it there if you found us through Google Plus.
Okay, and just give people the address one more time so they can write it down in case they have a pen. So that's bit.ly, bit period, ly/AFSP, and then the word journey, no spaces. Okay, so it's bit.ly/AFSP Journey. And we will see you in 30 minutes.
Thank you.
Welcome back. I hope you were as moved and engaged by the film as we all were. We've all seen it a number of times, and it inspires me every time, and every time I find it's impossible to get through without tears. It's so heartfelt and beautifully done. For those of you who are just joining us now, who might not have been with us before the film, I'd like to reintroduce everyone. I'm Eric Marcus, Senior Director for Loss and Bereavement Programs at the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Here with me in our conference room at 120 Wall Street in New York City at AFSP's headquarters, national headquarters, Shirley Kaminsky, who is a national board member, longtime volunteer, and chair of the Loss and Bereavement Council, which is the volunteer committee that advises the organization on all of its loss and bereavement programs. Shirley is also a suicide loss survivor who lost her son in 1987 at the age of 18. I'm also a suicide loss survivor. My dad took his life in 1970 and my sister-in-law in 2008. Also joining us here in New York is Dr. Christine Moutier, who is the Chief Medical Officer of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. We have three other guests who are involved with the film that you've just watched. Lindsay Grazel is the editor and producer of The Journey. Lindsay, welcome back from Portland, Oregon. Lindsay,
Hi. Had a hard time unmuting my microphone.
welcome back. And joining us from Davis, California, Brianna, who's a participant in the film.
Hi, everyone. I'm honored to be here.
And we have Blake from Berkeley, California, a student at the University of California, Berkeley. Welcome back, Blake.
Hi, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed the film.
Before I start asking questions of all of you, I want to give instructions to our viewers about how to ask a question. You have to be a Google Plus member already. Don't do that now because you'll miss most of what we're doing. But if you've already signed into Google Plus, you can ask a question. And let me explain how you do it. And I'm going to read the instructions since I'm no technical wizard. Hannah Moak, as you know, our technical wizard, explained all of this to me. So if you'd like to ask a question anytime during our discussion, you need to look at the screen. In the right-hand corner, you'll see a little square in your video box. It's made up of little squares. And you click on that little box of squares, and you'll see an icon, one of your icons says Q&A. So you click on Q&A, and that will allow you to ask questions. You'll type in the questions. We'll get them here. Our question and answer wizard, Camille, will write the questions for us on the wall, and then you'll see me squinting because I don't have my glasses on, a case of bad vanity. And I will read the questions and direct the questions to our guests here today. So again, corner of your screen, right-hand corner, the box with lots of little boxes. Click on that. You'll see an icon for Q&A. Click on that, and you can type in questions. But I have questions first. So we're going to talk about the film. And we'll talk about the film first until about 5 minutes after the hour, and then we'll start answering your questions as you send them in to us. So first, Blake, this question is for you. Why did you decide to participate in the film?
I think just sharing my story kind of for myself served as an empowerment for myself, and to be able to tell everyone else about my story, I knew it could help other people because at first I kept it to myself for a long time. And then as I learned, you know, telling other friends and telling other people that I could actually help people because what I go through isn't something that's single to myself and can help a lot of other people. And the more I began telling people, the more I felt like I was being able to make a difference, and making a difference for me was peaceful for me, and I also was able to help my friend. I feel like in his life was built to be able to live on through my message and being more of an active member in my community with this issue that affects a lot of us.
Thank you, Blake. Brianna, I wonder the same question for you. Why did you decide to participate in the film? It's one thing to talk to friends and family. It's another to participate in a film like this, which will be watched by thousands of people.
Well, primarily for me, the biggest part of my grieving process was feeling very alone and isolated. And I remember being a 15-year-old girl at the mall shopping for a black dress for a funeral for my boyfriend and being so resentful of the fact that I felt that I was the only one who had to deal with that kind of pain. And so through organizational walks and community walks and even just interacting with people who understood my story made me feel as though I wasn't the only one. And that's when I really started catapulting in my success and to trying to like actively grieve and understand what happened and grow from it. So when I was given those opportunities to understand other people's stories, I realized how important that was to other people who just don't know how they need to grieve just yet. So my intention through the video was to hopefully reach out to somebody else who maybe went through the same thing as I did to better understand how they're feeling and not feel as isolated and alone.
I think what happens also sometimes, Brianna, there was a woman who, a young woman who I heard from, who actually someone told me about, who felt that because it was just her boyfriend, it wasn't, she didn't have the right to feel as bad as she did. That it wasn't a family member, it wasn't a sibling, it was her boyfriend, so she was just her boyfriend, but she was equally, she was of course upset about the loss, and I wonder if that had a special meaning for you, being able to talk about this kind of person and your relation to him, that it brings it raises the important point that it doesn't have to be a blood relative, that it could be a friend or colleague, and you're affected by this. I wonder what your thoughts are on that, Brianna.
Yeah, initially one of the greatest things was I actually went to school with some of my boyfriend's siblings, and so I would see them crying on campus, and I would feel like I couldn't associate with that because they had known them their entire lives, and they were blood related, and so they had every single right to be upset, and that I didn't because I hadn't known him for as long. And we were freshmen in high school, so I mean, we didn't know each other for very long, and it really didn't parallel the relationship that he had with his own family. So a lot of my confusion and isolation and whatnot came from the fact that I felt like it wasn't justified to feel the way I did. So, and then, 5 years later, I realized that that was something that was very painful and very constructive and foundational to who I am now. So, if I were to have met anyone who's in that position now, I would definitely want to have said, no, you are completely okay in feeling how you feel. Like, don't feel ashamed, don't question it. Pain is different for each person, and it doesn't make it any less if there's somebody else who has a different relationship. So I think that is so important, and at the time I wish I knew that.
And now people do, because they're hearing it from you.
I hope.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Brianna.
No, I said I hope so.
And just for our viewers, in case you're wondering why we're switching back and forth from Brianna to us, back to Brianna, there's a slight clicking sound in our studio, and anytime it recognizes a conference room, anytime the computer hears that, it switches back. So I apologize for our computers and our sound. But you're hearing all of us, and that's what's most important. Blake, I have another question for you. So I know you're an athlete at Berkeley, and I wonder, as an athlete, did you have any hesitation sharing the mental health issues you talked about in the film?
I think with athletes and just even people in general, and I think especially men, there's this idea of being tough and, just suck it up, be tough, go play. So I think for myself, I didn't want to be seen as weak as an athlete, but I think it's a problem that does affect a lot of athletes, and they don't want to talk about it. So I think one of my things I wanted to bring up was, talking about it in the athletic community, and I'm happy that it's been more of a discussion. So that's been great, but I think it's definitely a significant barrier, and I think there's a lot of people who do struggle with it as athletes, and they find a hard place to talk about it because, we want to go compete, we want to go do this, but at the same time we're having this struggle on the other side.
Blake, I wonder, what would you recommend to other athletes who have issues around depression and who might be afraid to talk about it? How can they find help? How did you find help?
Well, I found help by talking to my athletic trainer, and they really did a lot of, good things for me, and I'll be forever grateful for that. So that would be my recommendation would be to talk to your athletic trainer and let them know what's going on, and they're usually trained and they know what to do when situations like that arise. So talking to your athletic trainer would be the best thing to do, and just to realize that there's no shame in it at all. I think for a while, what was stopping me is that I was scared and that I was shameful that I was feeling a certain way. And having no shame about it is important, and it will allow you to properly heal.
It's something I wish I had done when I was in college. I waited until much later to get help because I knew I just was sad all the time and couldn't quite understand why. Lindsay, what was your goal in producing this film? Since you were the person responsible for shaping it, we all worked together as a team, and there were many people who worked on the film. But you had primary responsibility.
Well, the goal for the film was to address what Brianna brought up, was this feeling of isolation that people have. We were hoping to create and share people's stories so that people from all kinds of different backgrounds and all different circumstances could relate to some aspect of other people's story. And of course, for Suicide Loss Survivor Day, the goal of the film is to start discussion amongst people in person, but not everyone can get to an event, and so I'm glad that the film will hopefully give people a little taste of that, even if they're not able to go to an event.
Lindsay, I wonder, I was with you for some of the filming, and Shirley was as well, and certainly Christine, you were there because you were interviewed for the film. I wonder, how did you choose? When you had hours, you had 9 hours of group interviews, you had many more hours of interviews with the 3 stories that you focused on, and then with Shirley and with Christine. How did you choose the snippets of story with which you told this story, which has this beautiful arc, beginning with the experiences of suicide loss and moving through to finding hope and healing in the aftermath?
Well, I think the big thing is that we heard similar things from multiple people, so there were themes that were coming up. So it was clear that they were important things to contribute. So, you know, there were certain topics that I might have 3 or 4 different sound bites that were kind of all saying the same thing, and so it was really just a matter of, you know, who said it in a way that worked with the film in terms of timing and was looking at the camera and, you know, those sort of things. But in terms of content, you know, talking to you guys and hearing everyone's stories, it really it became pretty obvious what was important to include, especially those hard pieces that people don't feel like they can talk about with other people. You know, we had 2 people in the film talk about a feeling of relief after their loved one died of suicide, and you know, that's very real, and it's not something that people feel like they can really talk about. So this film is an opportunity to put that out there in front of people and hopefully open up a discussion about that kind of thing.
Christine, I wonder, and this is to what you said about this issue of relief that many people experience in the aftermath of a suicide. It's something I experienced after my dad died because my parents had such a terrible relationship, and the fact that my father wasn't there and there weren't explosive fights gave me a sense of relief, which I felt horrible about having, and was something that was very hard to acknowledge. I wonder, Christine, why do you think Sandra smiled in the film when she said she knew she shouldn't talk about it, after saying that she felt relieved?
Well, I think she smiled because she had kept her feeling of relief a secret for so long, and here she is now in this setting, able to talk about it, and it was kind of like a little moment of a feeling of release. But I just did want to say a word about relief, because for those, it's not that everyone experiences that feeling when they lose someone, but I think one way to look at it is when the suicide death comes after a long period of suffering that you, the survivor, lived through and was aware of, just like a person would with a family member with cancer or some other type of terminal illness, let's say. Then when death comes, there oftentimes is a whole mixture of feelings that are, of course, filled with sadness and grief and loss and longing, but also that sense that they're not having to suffer any longer. And the impact on our lives in real time is not impacted in the same way. So that feeling is a very natural one for some. I think when the suicide death comes more out of the blue from the experience of the survivors, then relief may not even come up at all, because it's so shocking and is filled with such a sense of just simply the disbelief and the loss that has just occurred suddenly.
We have a question that's come in from one of our viewers that I'd like you to address, Shirley. How can people who are not survivors of suicide loss support those who are?
That's a really good question, and I know a lot of people struggle with that. I would say be with the person who is a survivor, be a good listener, refrain from telling them, I know how you feel, because you really don't if you've not been through a suicide loss. Offer to do things for them around the home, run errands, grocery shop, babysit, feed the pets, take the dog for a walk, practical things like that. And don't wait for the person to ask you to do those things, because they're in so much grief and so much pain early on that they don't even know what their needs are. So just, you might say, can I take your dog for a walk? Or can I go to the grocery store and pick up some things? Those kinds of things are very, very helpful.
Brianna, I wonder if what your experience was after your boyfriend took his life. What did people say? What did they do that actually made you feel better?
There were a lot of different responses, but the ones that really counted to me the most were people who were there for me regardless of whether I was freaking out about an assignment, like things that were completely unrelated, but consistently. Because oddly enough, there were people who were almost attracted by it and were by my side all day, every day, and then a month later, the thought, I guess, passed their minds and they were gone. And so with that standard of comparison, the people that were always there for me were the people that mattered most, and even the easiest, most relaxed, unrelated situations, it felt like I had someone who could see me for all of me as opposed to see me only in relation to the event that happened. Because especially in a high school community, sometimes it happens where you feel as though everyone is kind of labeling you, and that of course comes with like adolescent insecurity and whatnot, but it felt as though when I walked through the halls, people saw me as the girl who lost her boyfriend to suicide. So people who treated me just as who I was, through the person that I was, through what I offered, through what I said, through the actions that I made, were the people that helped me the most because they made me feel more normal. But yeah.
Thanks, Brianna. Now, Blake, you lost a friend, and so people might not necessarily think to reach out to you or think that you were even in pain in any way. What kinds of things did people do or say that made you feel good, and were there any that actually made you feel worse?
Yeah, that was kind of the thing, is a lot of people didn't know my relationship with my friend, and so that, because he was a couple years younger than myself, so my friends didn't realize that I was that close with him. Only a few did. But I remember one of the nicest things was one of my friends didn't really know what to say, didn't really know what to do, but they just came over, and they left him a Jack in the Box Oreo shake on my front door, and left a little note, and just rang the door and texted me and said, hey, come outside, we have something for you. And that's something that I'm forever grateful for and I'll forever remember. But just even the little things like that, those were the things that, you might not think that mean a lot, but the smallest things oftentimes are the most beautiful things. And yeah, that was one moment that really stuck with me, and my friends were really supportive of me, and I think I was more scared to talk to them, but at the same time, they were really supportive. When I found out, I was on my senior trip of high school, going down to San Diego, and I remember I just started crying, and everyone in the car was just quiet, and then, one of my friends put on my favorite song an hour later, and that just brought me a smile, so just small things like that are the things that I remember the most.
One of the things that I was talking just the other day with a loss survivor about this, and she said, actually he was asked, there's a young man who was asked what to say, and a person answered and said, this is at an event we had in Washington, and the person said, just a hug. You don't necessarily have to say anything. If you're comfortable, just hug someone, and that makes a big difference.
Or say, I don't know what to say. I have no idea what you're feeling. I don't know what to say, and I'm here for you. And a hug.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's very important. Yeah. We have another question. Let's see. Can a mom get PTSD from the loss of a child? Well, I can tell you can get PTSD from the loss of a father since I remember in my therapy, I've been seeing a therapist for many years, and I actually made a point of seeing a therapist in the years before I turned 44, which is the age my father was when he died, because I was afraid of winding up just like my father, of taking my life too. And it was actually a very real fear because I had read as a layperson, I wasn't a therapist, I didn't know, I'd read that people who had lost someone to suicide were at a greater risk of suicide. So I thought that meant that I personally was at greater risk and that I'd wind up just like him. So I saw a therapist all through that period, and then and at some point my therapist said to me, "Are you familiar with what PTSD is?" And I remember saying, "That's not my problem," which of course meant that I should listen to him because I was being very resistant and oppositional. So I'll leave the question to you, Christine. Is it possible for someone, let's broaden it, for someone who loses someone to suicide, a mom losing a child, a young person losing a parent, is it possible to suffer from PTSD? And that's post-traumatic stress syndrome. Yes.
So while the syndrome of post-traumatic stress disorder officially and technically involves a life-threatening experience, we think of trauma certainly along a spectrum, and so it depends on a lot of things about how the experience of a suicide loss may affect the person. One model to think about it is in terms of complicated grief, which PTSD or PTSD-like symptoms can absolutely be a part of. And so, you know, the triad of symptoms that are involved with PTSD are a sense of hyperarousal where you're always on edge and easily startled, or when things that even remotely remind you of the traumatic loss can sort of send your mind into a tailspin. Avoidance of those types of triggers is part of the syndrome, and so it absolutely can is the short answer. And again, you would need to get evaluated and seek out, I would say, professional evaluation and treatment for that. At the end of the day, it matters less to me as when I'm treating a person, or if it's my family member being on that side of the healthcare receiving end. The diagnosis matters less, and what is happening in the healing process matters more. So I think the trauma model is very relevant when it comes to suicide loss, and there are things that can be done to address that. All the things that we heard about in the journey that are related to steps a person can take in their own life and with their own peers and community, and there is also professional mental health help for syndromes like that.
Why might someone actually, Shirley, I have a follow-up question for you in just a moment, but I want to follow up and ask my boss, Dr. Moutier, a personal question about my own experience. Why would a patient push back if a therapist suggested PTSD? My therapist also used the word trauma, and it took me a few years before I was comfortable with that. And I pushed back and said, I am not traumatized by what happened to me. Why might someone resist that?
Well, I think in addition to the obvious that many of us don't want to have a label, that's the last thing we're looking for. But additionally, I think you as human beings, we're so resilient in many ways. We accommodate to what's going on, and we attempt to normalize it. So we live with that experience of loss, and you probably had for a long period of time when you were hearing this idea of trauma. Mm-hmm. And so the idea of trauma didn't fit in your mind what you've been experiencing and living through. It meant you would have been in a different place symptomatically or functionally in your life. And so, I think we all have different ways of interpreting mm-hmm. words like that. And again, at the end of the day, I think that is less important. It's more about coming to an understanding that is helpful for you to start working with and moving forward, moving through.
And it actually, in the end, proved healing for me to be able to embrace the fact that I had been traumatized as a 12-year-old. And it helped me understand why I still had issues as a 56-year-old, well, 55, this was last year, around something that happened so long ago, that it had that lasting impression. So it helped to finally embrace that. But probably he should have used some word other than trauma, so I could have accepted it more readily. Is any of this familiar to you, Shirley, because you are a mom who lost a child? Does this sound familiar?
It does sound very familiar. And therapy was a very important part of my recovery. after I lost David. It was a very sudden death with David. We had no previous history of depression or anything. It took us all by surprise, and so I did feel traumatized. I think PTSD wasn't even in my vocabulary 27 years ago, or many other people's vocabulary at that point in time. But I was very fragile for quite a long time, and therapy was a big part of my healing process early on for the first couple of years.
Well, this leads us to a question that's come in from a viewer, and I'm going to also ask our two film participants this question as well. Shirley, I got to know you many years after David's death, and to hear you describe yourself as fragile is shocking to me because you are my anchor. You're so strong, and I feel strong after all these years as well. When do you start to feel normal again?
Well, that's a very interesting question because normal is no longer normal after having lost a child the way that I did. I had a new normal after that. I don't even like to use the term normal anymore. And that varies from individual to individual. People ask me, when will I start to feel normal? When will I be able to find joy in my life again? And that's a very individual thing. I think time is a great healer. And I don't like to use that cliche, but it's reality. It's the way it is. And it's different for different people when they start to be able to integrate their loss into their lives. Our lives are forever changed by that suicide loss. And so we find a new normal, if you will, and move forward and find joy and purpose in our lives again. And that's a gradual process. And if you ask me now when that happened for me, I couldn't even tell you.
I like the word integrate. When you talk about integrating the experience, because I bristle when I hear people talk about getting over it or closure. Even in a death that's not related to suicide. My mom didn't kill herself, but I won't get over her death. I won't have closure. I'll integrate the experience. And that's how it's been much more helpful to use that word integrate and to have that as the goal, with my dad at least, because it's something that lives with me and it changes. And I wonder for Blake, let's start with you. When did you start to feel normal again? And we'll use Shirley's definition of normal, which is there's no such thing as normal. But when did joy come back into your life? When did you start to feel good again, as Eva talked about in the movie, for example? When did the light start coming back?
I think it was definitely, the film titled The Journey is spot on because it is a journey. It definitely took me a couple years to finally come at peace, and I think for me it was learning about suicide, getting involved and speaking up about what it is. So I think the biggest thing is once I started learning about mental health, and once I started learning about depression and anxiety, I was able to kind of understand why it happened. And when I started to understand why, I was able to find some form of peace in what happened. So I think understanding why is the biggest part for myself, and that allowed me to find peace. And then healing for me came through, writing about it, writing poetry about what happened, and that kind of started to give me some light. And I think when I wrote a poem for my friend, and when I brought it to his grave is, I think, the one time where I really felt peace and solidarity with it. So that was the biggest time that came, probably 2 years after. But you don't ever feel normal again. I think you just learn to live without him. And for me, learning to live without him is remembering his smile, remembering all the great things about my friend.
Jump in and say.
Just start again because we were on mute.
Okay. I would just like to jump in and say that a big part of my healing journey, which I always explain to people as being a lifelong healing journey, has been my work with AFSP and my volunteer work. Prior to AFSP, I did start a support group for suicide survivors, survivors of suicide loss, and that was helpful for me. However, my work with AFSP over the years has meant so very much to me, knowing that I could possibly make a difference in one other person's life. And it's helped me to keep the memory of my son David alive. And it's work that I love. It's my heart's work and my life's work now.
I think it's true for so many people that being able to help another lost survivor through their experience. And I don't recommend this for somebody who's just been through the experience of suicide loss, but when you're ready, that ability to help someone else, as Kathy talks about in the film, in helping others, there's something that's almost inexplicable about it. But you do feel better when you can help somebody else, and you can show them that you can live again. And as Eva says, you can smile again. The light comes back. But it can take a long time. As Janet in the film says, it was 44 years for her. My sister, brother, and I talked about it as death. Oh, I was determined not to choke up on this program. My sister, brother, and I talked about it together as a group for the first time just 3 weeks ago. And that's 44 years after her dad died. So I think of what Janet says, that it's never too late for hope, never too late to heal. But Brianna, when did
For me, normal was something that kind of creeped up on me, honestly. I want to say from my freshman year until part of my senior year, I kept trying to fit myself into a mold of what normal was. And I kept thinking, okay, a normal person would do this, this, and this, and prioritize this, this, and this, and that is what I'm going to do and think about. And so I kept prioritizing those things over my own emotional, like just paying attention to my own grief, really. So I remember my senior year, I was so overwhelmed with these expectations and priorities that I had set for myself that I got to one point where I was like, you know what, I don't even care anymore. And I just stopped trying to fit those things. And within just a course of a few months, everything kind of started falling together because I let myself follow a natural path. And though that's not very specific, I just think the moral of that is to just stop putting a pressure on yourself to be what you think is a healed, normal, happy person. Because once I released that pressure, I just started to understand how to work with myself. And I think I've reached a new normal that without having lost my boyfriend, I wouldn't be half of the person that I am today. And I'm proud of who I am. And while I don't wish that pain on anyone else, I wouldn't have changed my journey into getting to where I am now. Because it definitely was completely changed my life for the better, honestly.
Brianna, it's interesting that you mentioned that how changed you are, and you're a different person in a positive way out of something so traumatic and sad. And I think all of us who've been through that experience understand exactly what you mean. I wouldn't be here doing the work I'm doing. I wouldn't be sitting next to my buddy Shirley. I wouldn't have the opportunity to work with Christine. And just this past Tuesday, Christine and I were with Dylan and Katie from the film in Washington making visits to members of Congress on Capitol Hill. And Katie and Dylan hadn't been to Washington before. And Katie, in one of our meetings with one of the congressional staffers, said, look at the incredible opportunity we've had because our dad took his life. And of course she'd rather have her dad back. But here they have the opportunity to make this big difference. They've come to Washington. They've gotten to be in a film. And we get to do this extraordinary work because of our experiences. So as horrible as it is to lose someone to suicide, I think it's helpful to look at the opportunities as well that come out of that. And I try not to feel guilty whenever I feel good about the work I'm doing, because I think I'm reminded that it's because of my father's suicide and my sister-in-law's suicide that I'm here.
A great moment of healing happened for me, and I do remember the time frame of that. It was 5 years after David died when I was working with a group of individuals. And it just became very clear to me that I could say, thank you, David, for the gifts that you've given me through your death. And that was a huge moment of healing for me. And very joyful.
Yeah. The first picture I brought with me, I brought a couple of pictures with me when I came to work here. I brought a picture of my partner, of course, and I brought a picture of my dad from when I was 2 years old and he's holding me. And I had a conversation with him that first day. And I said, you know, I never wanted to work on Wall Street. I never wanted to work in the financial industry. And here I am working on Wall Street for AFSP because of my dad. And I said to the picture, and I always tease people, who talk to people who are dead, but there I was. And I said, Dad, can you believe where we are? And where life has taken me because of what you did? And what an opportunity now to help other people and to meet and work with wonderful people and all the people who are in the film. You just never know where it's going to take you. I wonder,
And I would just like to say one thing to those of you who are watching in the audience, who it's a very new experience for you, and your loss is
yes,
very recent, and your pain is probably still very raw and right there on your chest. And that is, you probably can't even conceive of being in a place that we are talking about right now. And so don't force yourself to get there. It will happen when the time is right for you.
thank you for making I had forgotten where we are and what day this is. Most people who come to Survivor Day events are newly bereaved. They've lost someone very recently. And I can tell you, if somebody had told me, even a week after my sister-in-law took her life, or a year after, that I'd be in this place now, I would have said, I probably would have used foul language, because I wasn't ready to hear it, and I couldn't believe it. This next question I'd like to, maybe you and Christine can answer, and the question is, how does the suicide of a child affect a marriage? What does it do to a married couple? Take that first, Christine?
Sure, I'll just speak more generally that I think the idea that you might have heard before, that I've heard, that when a person, but certainly a married couple or a committed couple, experiences a trauma or extreme adversity, that it can go different ways then in terms of the impact on the relationship and what happens in the dynamic between the two. And probably the more natural thing to happen is for it to be a very divisive experience, because no two people are identical and can relate step by step at each step of the way. And so having that loving and healthy respect and communication about where the other one is and finding a way to support each other. So what I was going to say is it can go, to simplify things, it can go one of two directions. It can go towards disastrous, just dissolution of the relationship, or it can actually be somewhat of a bonding experience, and of course everything in between, and probably mixtures of those models. But I'll let Shirley speak to it more specifically, but I think that the loss of a child to suicide certainly has that potential. It's extremely traumatic.
And I'll just speak very briefly about my own experience with that. My husband now, and at the time of David's death, is David's stepfather. And my husband was like my rock during those first months and years. He was very supportive and just really, it solidified our relationship even more, I believe. However, with my work with survivors of loss through a support group that I've been facilitating for the last 20 plus years, I've seen a lot of couples who have really struggled with their relationship, some who have dissolved their relationship, some who even just coming to the support group has been helpful. Certainly getting therapy has been helpful. And people grieve so differently. Men and women grieve so differently. And a couple having lost a child, because they're in so much pain in those initial months and first few years, it's hard to be supportive of one another because you simply just don't have the energy sometimes.
I have a question that actually there's a question for Lindsay. And then I have a final question before we wrap up. Lindsay, what did you learn from making this film? I love this question because I think you'll see why. As someone who wasn't in this world. So I like the idea of thinking of you, Lindsay, as out of this world because because your work is really out of this world and fantastic, along with Jeff Gersh, who is the executive producer, and your whole team. But as a non-survivor, as someone who didn't experience this closely in your family, what did you learn from making this film?
I learned a lot, and I really have a lot of respect for everyone who participated and was able to share their stories so generously with me, someone they had zero relationship with whatsoever. I have not experienced suicide in my own life, suicide loss. So the thing that really struck me was how wise everyone was, that they have really incorporated a lot of knowledge about themselves and the world, and taken that out into the rest of their lives. And it's inspirational because we all face challenges one way or another, and maybe it's suicide loss and maybe it's something else. but the lessons that they were able to articulate so clearly, and also the struggles that come before that, just makes me appreciate, when I'm in a struggle myself, that I can get through it, that there are strategies, and I think those are lessons for all of us. So I really, I learned a little bit about myself, I learned about life, and I feel really grateful that I was able to work on the project.
And we're very grateful that you did. I'd like to ask Brianna first and then Blake this question. What do you hope people will take away from this film? And Brianna, let's start with you.
I really hope people realize that suicide is something that touches so many different people, so many different ages, at so many different parts of their lives. And that the greatest thing, personally, I've ever experienced is just sharing stories with people I've never even met before and feeling like I could connect with them, even though I didn't know anything about them before. And feeling almost like a kinship with strangers, which is honestly something I haven't felt in any other situation, is a really beautiful thing. And through seeing the film, you kind of get a little sneak peek of what it's like if you decide that you want to start that conversation with other people. And I hope that encourages people to continue that conversation, because I think a lot of the time, if people feel sad, if they feel isolated, if they've lost someone, or if they're struggling with suicide or depression in their own lives personally, that a lot of the time the inability or the feeling of the inability to go speak to other people increases the feelings of isolation and feeling desperate. And I think that if they just went outside of themselves and chose to speak to someone, it would make a huge difference. And I hope that the video really portrays that.
Thanks, Brianna. Blake, what do you hope people take away from the film?
Yeah, I think Brianna definitely summed it up very well. But I think the biggest thing is you are not alone. That was something that I just felt I was alone for so long. And as I've, got out of my comfort zone and started to learn more about it, I was like, I'm not alone anymore. There's a community. There's people who are trying to fix this public problem in society and working towards a world without suicide. So my biggest thing is you're not alone. Be good to yourself and treat yourself nicely, and you will heal. It's a journey, but things will get better.
Thank you, Blake. And Shirley, you were our host for this film, our opening and closing. What, and I'll ask you for your final remarks in just a few minutes, but I just wonder first, what do you hope people will take away from the film?
I just have to echo Blake and Brianna, is that none of you need to be in isolation. You do not have to be alone. And I'm very hopeful that those of you attending today have realized that you all grieve in your own individual way. It's never too late to heal. And there's lots of support. We have a huge community of survivors of suicide loss.
Christine, do you have any thoughts on what you hope people will take away from the film?
Yeah, much the same as what everybody has been saying. I've been so inspired by the courage to share and just hearing the inspiration of the change that can happen. And I've long been a believer in the fact that we can take steps that sometimes go outside our comfort zone, so it wouldn't be the natural impulse to do it. But if we're wise and seek some guidance and actually act on those words of wisdom, and there was certainly much of that in the film, that you can actually help steer your life and your health and your experience of life in a different direction than it would have otherwise gone. And so while I absolutely agree that time is a big component of this, doing nothing and doing something, even if it's small, talking to somebody about it, is actually a very significant and important thing you can do. So I would just leave you with that even if you can do one thing that you wouldn't have otherwise done, it can make a big difference.
Well, I'd like to thank our guests today. I'd like to thank first Dr. Christine Moutier, Shirley Kaminsky, and our guests in Portland and in Davis and in Berkeley. Blake, Brianna, Lindsay, thank you so much. I'd like to thank our crew, Hannah Moak, Camille, Claire Wolford, and our Vice President of Communications, Stephanie Coggin. I'd also like to thank our CEO, Bob Gebbia, for supporting us in this effort and this film. Thank you for letting us take risks that we haven't taken before and being very supportive of that. I'd like to also thank all of you, our viewers, for joining us today, for having the courage to be with us, and for watching this film. If you'd like to see the film again, you will be able to as of Monday or Tuesday. We're not sure yet. It will be up on our website, survivorday.org. Also, check out our new digital memory quilt, which Claire Wolford created with Jonathan Dozer-Ezel, who's also on our staff. You can find that at survivorday.org. And any questions you have about suicide, you can find answers at afsp.org. And Shirley, you get the last word for today. Last words.
Again, I want to thank all of you who are attending out there for being on the program today and for asking the questions that you've asked. And it is my hope that you have found additional healing by watching our program today, or have maybe started your healing journey today. So take good care and be kind and gentle to yourself. Thank you so much.